It seems as though Cathie Wood is getting more and more interested in SoFi. She's been buying nonstop since last week. She's over doubled her position, one of the largest institutional holders at this point, and still accumulating stock consistently. She just had an interview with Anthony Noto this week. I'm going to be talking about that along with some other SoFi news that happened this week. Let's dive right in. First and foremost, you'll notice that I'm not at my usual setup. The audio probably sounds a little bit worse. The video might look a little bit worse, less lighting. The reason for this is because I'm taking a few days off. I'm going to be back to my regular setup in a couple of days. So bear with me for these next couple of videos. We started off on Monday with the All-Star weekend, and really I posted about this. I made a separate video completely on this point. We had SoFi branding everywhere. One of the biggest pieces of feedback was that some of the SoFi watermarks, the digital decals essentially, did not appear in some of the replays. I posted a video around Dame Lillard shooting this half-court shot where SoFi's logo was clearly in the shot. And there was also several other videos around the All-Star weekend in general. Lots of impressions are gathering. I also saw this video around an influencer, this magician essentially on SoFi Stadium that had gotten multiple millions of views. Really, the overarching thesis there is that the SoFi branding on the NBA deal, and I talk about this, much more in depth in that previous video, but that branding is really a key value proposition to increasing that unaided brand awareness. And as a result of that, having more people understanding the SoFi brand. I think one of the biggest pieces of news this week also came on Monday. Capital One essentially acquiring Discover Financial Services, a consolidation in the credit card space. I ran a poll around whether this hurts or helps SoFi. The overwhelming response was a lot of people just don't know. I presented in that poll a couple of alternatives as to, how I could argue both sides. You could argue that it hurts SoFi because, well, SoFi is already kind of struggling on their credit card business, and a consolidation in the space is the strengthening of a competitor. I think Capital One now becomes the sixth largest bank in the state, something like that. One way that it could help it is it brings more mergers and acquisitions attention to the industry. It brings more attention around consolidation. I mean, Elizabeth Warren was immediately out and against this deal. So obviously there's a lot of eyeballs on that deal specifically. I also added that disruption here can also attract some demand for SoFi's products because essentially there's a lot of customers maybe at Discover that did not want to get acquired. And so while this deal might have made sense on the company level, there's probably some users there that are going to be looking to switch as a result of it. So time will tell whether this helps or hurts SoFi. I don't necessarily know if this deal will even go through, but it's on the table right now. It's an active conversation. It's not necessarily a direct competitor to SoFi, but it is a part of SoFi's business, this credit card aspect. I could make a strong argument that it does help. I mean, there's fewer options in the market if these products consolidate. And again, there's going to be a large cohort of users that don't necessarily want this to happen and don't want to be under that Capital One umbrella. So I could definitely see it. I could argue it both ways, but time will tell. We're going to be talking about this a little later on the SoFi podcast. I don't necessarily have all the numbers and stats in front of me right now. I'm sort of just sharing some more raw thoughts in the moment just because I didn't want to skip this week for the news. I wanted to basically share what I had anyways. I did end up buying on Monday over $7,000 of SoFi stock. This was an add to my existing position. I did also buy January 2026 $15 strike price leaps. I also have 2025 leaps for January. And, really, I do think that it is all on the back of this stronger base that is being formed through profitability. More institutions are now feeling more comfortable to get into SoFi. I mean, ARK Invest is one of them that's leading that charge, but there's a lot of institutions. I saw that, Citadel, Ken Griffin's fund, Paul Tudor Jones, Jim Simmons, a lot of these big boys are now finally starting to dip their toes back into SoFi. And overall, institutional ownership continues to go up. Short interest is like at record highs as of the latest numbers. And so it really is a perfect storm, I think, that could propel SoFi this year to do well on the back of consistent profitability. I think that powder keg spark is essentially if Q2 profitability comes in and they raise guidance again and it's actually stronger than expected, and maybe the lending segment doesn't fall, maybe it's flat, maybe it goes up single digit percentages, then all of a sudden you have a confirmation of that profitability. It's consistent. It's no longer a fluke. And more institutions will go in as a result of that, because a lot of institutions right now, if they have one quarter of profitability, some of them are going to go in on that. Others are going to just wait for that second or maybe that third quarter. Of course, when you have 4 quarters of profitability, profitability, the conversation turns to the S&P inclusion as well as, something that's on the table for SoFi. And I've sort of been in this camp previously. I've said this in the past before, that I think that SoFi has reached that inflection point through profitability where 2023 and previous years were behind the scenes building years. And 2024 seems like the year when all cylinders are going to be firing at the same time, when profitability is basically insured and when that company has a runway to grow. It's essentially a prime time year for the business. The other thing that we saw on Tuesday was, there was a tax refund issue with SoFi. Basically, Bender 9000 made a post on Reddit. Chris Hager from Data Driven Investing talked about this post at length, tagged Anthony Noto. It became a huge deal. And the reason I won't go into the specifics around this tax issue is because SoFi released a post on X later that day saying that this issue was resolved. Very quick turnaround there. They resolved it immediately. It's more confirmation, at least in my mind, that management is paying attention to the right things, that management is listening to retail investors. If something goes viral, even the small SoFi community on X, management will be listening to that. Also on Tuesday, we saw a super small addition from Cathie Wood's funds, about 20,000 shares across both her funds, ARK F and ARK K, respectively. She also added again on Thursday a much bigger amount, her fourth day in a row. She added about 650,000 shares on Thursday across both of those funds. And I think the main point is this interview where Cathie Wood and Anthony Noto had through the form of a podcast. I've been seeing several quotes around this. Anthony Noto basically saying that trust is the biggest barrier to them achieving this large scale, reiterating the confidence that he has in the brand to be able to achieve that scale. And granted, I have not yet had a chance to watch the full interview. Like I said, I'm off the grid for a couple of days. So I'll get around to that maybe this weekend or maybe, on Monday when I get back. But, one of the criticisms that I was watching online was that they didn't have enough time to talk about the tech platform. And it seemed as though Cathie was not paying enough attention to the tech platform or factoring it in enough in her bull case, in her entire thesis. So I want to actually do a firsthand listen to actually validate whether that's the case or try to nitpick. And probably what I'll do is I'll make a separate video where I actually have the numbers and the stats in front of me and share that out the moment that I do. The fact that Cathie Wood seems to be, one of the most bullish proponents from an institutional perspective on SoFi recently, especially after that MBA announcement, that's really what kicked this all off. I do think that Cathie is definitely building her way towards being a top 3 or a top 5 institutional holder. I mean, right now, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's just under 10 million shares. I would say maybe 8.5, something like that. She can very easily get to that 10 million mark and then surpass it. And then very easily from there, start to accumulate even further to become, a top 3 institutional holder. ARK was also posting about SoFi, name dropping SoFi on a promotion that they had for the ARK X venture fund that's going to be available through SoFi. They did that this week. So lots of interactions between ARK Invest and SoFi recently. Personally, that's what I want to see. I want to see more of these interactions because I want to see those networks of people being exposed to SoFi's brand more on an institutional level, right? For right now, this is the Fundamentals Investing Podcast. Join us later tonight on the SoFi Weekly Podcast.